You are standing on the broken coast of Solstheim when the world goes sideways. The black book in your hands flutters open on its own. Ink writhes like something alive, and the snow, the waves, even the sound of your own breathing are torn away and replaced by the slow, wet turning of pages in a sky made of paper. Then the voice arrives, thick as oil and old as the first question ever asked. It does not shout. It simply observes you, curious and amused, as if you were a footnote that suddenly started talking back. In that moment, while your body hangs suspended between Solstheim and Apocrypha, a bargain you never really read is already being enforced. The Black Books are not just rare collectibles left lying in Draugr tombs and Telvanni towers. They are physical hooks driven from Hermaeus Mora's realm straight into the mortal world, bound in leather that never quite feels like it stopped breathing. Every curling page is a tendril of Apocrypha itself, folded down into something you can fit under your arm and pretend to understand. On Solstheim, they are as much a part of the landscape as the ash storms, the fungal towers, and the standing stones humming with power they were never meant to carry. Different eyes see different things when they look at a black book. To a Telvanni wizard, it is a shortcut, a personal portal to a library no rival can raid, a way to skip years of study with a single dangerous question. To Dunmer settlers, who already live with one foot in disaster, it is another cursed relic to be feared, traded, or hidden just deep enough that someone else's grandchildren will find it instead. To the Skaal, who have spent generations trying to live in balance with something older and stranger than Daedric princes, it is not a tool or a treasure at all. It is a wound in the world. On the surface, the deal looks simple. You read, you endure, and you come back with power you did not have before. A new way to twist the winds, a more efficient way to break bones, a whisper of knowledge that makes every other shout and spell feel clumsy and half-finished. The Black Book offers you a menu of gifts. What it does not show you is the bill. The first price is time, and you notice it only if you are unlucky enough to keep track. A reading that feels like minutes stretches on, and when you stagger back onto Solstheim's hard stone, the shadows have shifted further than they should. Campfires have burned low. Torches are dying. Companions who thought you were right behind them have begun to mutter about going on without you. Somewhere between one page and the next, Apocrypha borrowed an extra hour and did not ask permission. The second price is concentration. The more often a mind is dragged through corridors lined with whispering books and dripping with ink, the more those sounds and sights insist on coming back uninvited. A scholar in Raven Rock finds herself staring at a blank wall, certain she can see letters moving just beneath the plaster. A miner at the Earthstone feels an almost physical itch whenever he passes a shelf of ordinary paper, like the pages are offended at how little they know. What the Black Book takes, in tiny shavings and curls, is the part of you that can ever again be fully present in a room without shelves. The third price is memory, and this one leaves marks other people can see. Storm Crag Strider knows exactly what Hermaeus Mora wants, the moment that vast, glistening mass rises from the sea of spirits and coils around the Skaal village. He knows because somewhere, long ago, a story about forbidden knowledge made it across the snow, and because the Skaal have been refusing that bargain for so many generations that the refusal itself has become an article of faith. When Storm finally accepts the Black Book, he does not just read it, he offers his entire mind as payment so that his people, and perhaps the island itself, can survive. He never returns from that transaction. The knowledge does. It flows into him like a tide of knives, and in the end, there is nothing left for Mora to negotiate with. Storm's body collapses into the snow, and a Daedric prince withdraws, satisfied, leaving the Skaal to mourn a man whose last act was to become a margin note in someone else's library. Most readers do not pay in one dramatic gesture. Neloth of Tel Mithrin treats Black Books like particularly interesting lab equipment. He sends apprentices to prod them, to step through them, to bring back observations that can be filed and studied. He knows they are dangerous. He simply believes that danger is a tax other people should pay. Every time one of his experiments comes back a little quieter, a little more distracted, with a few more gaps in their recollection of harmless details, what they had for breakfast, the exact tone of a friend's voice, Neloth is delighted. The book has told him something new about the limits of mortal minds, and the lost fragments of those minds are, to him, an acceptable cost. For the Dragonborn, the price is easier to overlook because the rewards are so immediate. You emerge from Apocrypha with new paths carved into your skills, entire talent trees rewritten by a single choice on a single page. You feel stronger, sharper, more perfectly focused on whatever version of yourself you chose: shadow-drenched assassin, unbreakable warrior, storm-wrapped sorcerer. It feels like clarity. But the Black Book is keeping notes. Every time you choose between three powers, Mora learns which direction your hunger leans. Every time you willingly step back into a space made of ink and secrets, he confirms that you are the kind of soul who will trade pieces of their own stability for one more advantage. The cost for you is subtle, a growing inability to imagine stopping. You start to think of your mind, your ethics, your future as flexible material to be reshaped whenever the next page gives you a better offer. The people of Solstheim do not see this ledger directly. What they see are the side effects. Workers at the corrupted Standing Stones mumble in their sleep about pages turning in the sky. Skaal hunters hesitate just a heartbeat too long when a strange whisper catches on the wind, as if some part of them is listening for a question they do not remember agreeing to answer. Telvanni retainers develop a particular glassy stare when conversations turn to forbidden texts. They have seen their master's curiosity outlive too many apprentices to find the subject amusing. So when you hold a black book up to the torchlight in some Draga-choked ruin and watch the ink pulse in time with your own heartbeat, you are not just deciding whether you want a new shout or a unique ability. You are stepping into an account that has been open on Solstheim for far longer than you have been alive. Hermaeus Mora is not interested in a simple trade of one soul for one secret. He is interested in what happens to an entire island when enough people convince themselves that knowledge is worth any price, as long as they believe they are the ones collecting. In the old stories, artifacts are born with a single moment of creation. A sword is forged in sacred fire. A ring is cut from a fallen star. A staff is carved from the heartwood of a god-touched tree. The black books are different. They feel less like objects that were made and more like leaks that were never properly sealed. Apocrypha is already a kind of book, a plane where every surface is a page and every page is watching you back. When Hermaeus Mora peels off a fragment of that realm and folds it into the shape of a black book, he is not creating something new. He is exporting a piece of the environment. Each volume that washes up on Solstheim or appears in the dusty corner of a Telvanni tower is really a doorway disguised as a document, a pocket of realm stuff hardened into covers and spine. If the Ogma Infinium is a single, weaponized theorem about knowledge, a black book is a field experiment. The Infinium grants a fixed burst of understanding and then seals itself. The black books remain open-ended. They invite repeated readings, multiple visits, branching choices. They are not just measuring how much knowledge a mortal can absorb before they break. They are testing what kinds of knowledge different mortals will pursue when the menu is endless and the price is hidden. Solstheim, with its overlapping histories, is the perfect test site. It is an island that has already been claimed, abandoned, and reclaimed more than once. By Nords, by Dunmer refugees, by the Skaal who insist they belong to something larger than any empire. Ash from Red Mountain drifts across its snowfields. Old Nordic barrows sit half-swallowed by volcanic glass. Telvanni mushrooms sprout where no sane farmer would plant a field. It is a crossroads, and crossroads make excellent laboratories. The earliest Black Book readers we can trace are not heroes or villains, but scholars and opportunists. A minor mage in Raven Rock who vanishes from his journals halfway through a sentence about a most extraordinary volume, a tomb delver whose diary is found beside a Draugr sarcophagus, its last entry a shaky description of waking up on a staircase that went in circles forever. Their names drop out of history, not because no one cared, but because the people who cared most were the least likely to speak openly about what they had seen. The Skaal, for their part, treat every rumour of such books as a test. Their teachings insist that knowledge must be given and received in balance with the Allmaker, not wrestled from a tower of writhing tomes in a realm that smells like wet ink and old bones. When a Skaal hunter hears that someone has found a strange book in a barrow, they do not ask what it says. They ask whether the person who opened it is still the same when they close it, and what else might have come back with them. Telvanni wizards like Neloth come from the opposite instinct. For them, danger is proof of value. A book that whispers, resists, and occasionally devours its readers is far more interesting than a safe, well-behaved tome that stays where it is put. Neloth catalogues black books the way other mages catalogue rare plants, noting their effects, their reactions to different kinds of minds, the side effects that linger long after the cover is closed. Apprentices who falter under the strain are, in his view, simply unsuitable soil. As copies circulate, a kind of black market scholarship grows around them. Notes are smuggled out of Apocrypha and recopied by trembling hands, trying to fix in mundane ink what the mind can barely hold. These second-hand records warp quickly, half remembered, half invented, contaminated by fear and ego. But even in their errors, they serve Mora's purpose. They spread the rumor that there are answers somewhere beyond the veil, answers that only the bold or the reckless will reach. That rumor is itself a hook. By the time the Dragonborn arrives on Solstheim, the island is already threaded with these invisible lines of influence. A black book hidden in a barrow has pulled in generations of would-be heroes and thieves. Another, resting in Neloth's tower, has lured decades of apprentices into a career-ending kind of curiosity. A third waits in a ruin no one remembers how to pronounce, perfectly still, perfectly patient, knowing that eventually someone with a destiny attached to their soul will pass within arm's reach. From Hermaeus Mora's perspective, the history of these volumes is not a straight line of owners, but a web of questions. Who opened a book and slammed it shut after only one vision? Who kept going back until the real world felt less solid than the shelves of Apocrypha? Who tried to cheat, to take knowledge without offering anything of themselves? And what terrible small lesson did the book give them in return? What ties all of these stories together is that the books are never really lost. They can be buried, burned, or locked away behind the most elaborate wards a Telvanni can devise, but they behave less like property and more like symptoms. When a particular flavor of hunger rises on Solstheim, anger at the dragons, rage at the empire, desperation to save a people, simple greed for power, a black book has a way of being exactly where it needs to be. That is why every individual bargain matters less than the pattern they form. Each reader is a data point, each village that whispers about a cursed volume, each cult that forms around a half-understood vision, each mage who quietly loses their grip on the boundaries of their own mind. These are the contours of a much larger experiment. Mora is not just taking memories and moments, he is mapping the limits of mortal will, using Solstheim as his scratch paper. Seen this way, the question shifts. It is no longer, should I read this book? But, how many people like me has it already read? And what does it expect me to do next? At a distance, it is tempting to say that only fools and fanatics accept such an invitation. The stories favor those labels because they are simple and comforting. Only the greedy, the arrogant, or the desperate would gamble their minds in exchange for whispers on blackened parchment. Everyone else, people like to assume, would walk away. Solstheim quietly disproves that assumption. The island is full of people whose lives are already shaped by things they did not choose. Volcanic ash storms, imperial treaties, ancient curses carved into barrow walls, long before their grandparents were born. For many of them, a black book is not an intrusion, so much as an opportunity to finally push back. The miner who cannot feed her family, unless the Earthstone compels her to work beyond exhaustion. The skull hunter who watches the land grow sick around corrupted stones. The wizard whose tower is slowly being eroded by forces he cannot quite measure. Each of them lives inside a question. The book only gives that question a voice. This is the space where Hermaeus Mora thrives. He does not need to promise paradise or threaten damnation. He only needs to lean into the moment when frustration outweighs fear. The curse is old, the empire far away, the dragons deaf to prayer. But the pages are here now, and they are listening. The mortal who reaches for a black book rarely thinks of it as surrendering. It feels, in that instant, like seizing control. The early contracts on Solstheim are small by Mora's standards. A little knowledge traded for a little stability. A fisherman who learns how to read the weather just a fraction better than his rivals. A hedge witch who pulls one more healing secret from the margins and keeps her family alive through an ash-choked winter. These bargains do not rewrite history, they barely leave a trace. Yet each one teaches the prince something about what mortals will accept if the cost is spread thin enough across the years. Then eventually, someone like Miraak appears. Long before tales of Dragonborn echo across Skyrim again, Miraak discovers what the Black Books can really do. He is not a starving miner or a cornered hunter. He is a priest standing in the center of an empire built on dragon worship, a man already wrapped in power and ritual. For him, the book is not a last resort. It is a chance to unseat his betters. Miraak's first descent into Apocrypha is less a fall than a coronation rehearsal. He walks the endless stacks not as a supplicant, but as a man evaluating a throne room. The knowledge he finds there does not merely sharpen his existing abilities, it teaches him entirely new ways to think about domination. Dragons, he realizes, are not the only beings who can shout the world into new shapes. Words, when backed by the right kind of will and the right kind of patron, can be every bit as binding as a Thu'um. Hermaeus Mora, watching from every dripping surface, is pleased. Lesser mortals nibble at the edges of the books and stagger away with small insights, but Miraak devours page after page. He is willing to risk not just his sanity, but his entire place in the order of things. Where others ask for tools, he is already thinking in terms of systems. He does not merely want power. He wants an escape hatch from the entire dragon-ruled hierarchy. The agreement between them is never written out, never spoken in clean contractual language. It does not need to be. Miraak continues to read. Mora continues to open more of Apocrypha to him. With each visit, the priest's sense of allegiance frays, reweaving itself away from the dragons and toward the formless mass of eyes and ink that actually delivers results. By the time he openly turns against his dragon masters, the decisive moment has already happened in a library no mortal map records. On Solstheim, the effects are felt as rumor before they are felt as law. Cultists whisper about a man who walked into a black book and came back with knowledge that makes even dragons nervous. Workers at the stones fall under deeper and stranger compulsions. The island's spiritual weather changes. More dreams of pages and tentacles, more stories of voices that speak in riddles no common tongue should be able to form. To the Skaal, these changes are confirmation of everything they have ever feared about forbidden knowledge. To the Dunmer of Raven Rock, they are a problem to be managed, another wave of calamity to stand against with pickaxes and pragmatism. To Neloth, they are a thrilling data set. Somewhere between those reactions lies the truth of what the Black Books have become. No longer isolated leaks, but the beginnings of a tide. The Black Books are still, on paper, individual objects. Each has its own title, its own favoured subject, its own specific rewards. One offers to rearrange the way a warrior's body learns from battle. Another whispers to scholars about secrets buried in ordinary tomes. A third concerns itself with bending the wills of others. Yet the more of them appear, the less they behave like a scattered collection, and the more they resemble chapters of a single ongoing experiment. Each volume asks a different question, but all of those questions feed the same ledger. How much strength will a fighter sacrifice for flexibility? How many memories will a mage risk for one flawless insight? How willing is a would-be hero to let other people pay the price for their empowerment? In Apocrypha, those answers are not just observed. They are recorded, cross-referenced, and stored beside all the other times mortals have tried to bargain their way out of small lives. Solstheim is no longer just a place where black books can be found. It is what happens when enough of them have been opened. What began as scattered experiments starts to look, from above, like design. Every time a mortal on Solstheim opens a black book, a new line is drawn between Apocrypha and the island. Individually, those lines are thin and almost invisible, like cracks in old glass. Together, they form a web. Miraak sits near the center of the first version of that web. His temple rises from ash and stone as both monument and antenna, a place where knowledge pulled from Apocrypha is turned into labor and obedience. The workers who chip away at the land around his shrine are not scholars. They do not read the black books. They do not need to. Their wills have been bent downstream of someone else's bargain. From Hermaeus Mora's perspective, this is the most interesting part. Miraak proves that one reader with enough ambition can be used to touch hundreds of lives who never lay a hand on a black book themselves. A whispered insight about how to twist dragon words becomes a song that enslaves work crews. A revelation about how to anchor power in a standing stone becomes a public ritual no one remembers agreeing to perform. The books are not just rewriting one mind at a time. They are altering the flow of effort, fear, and faith across a whole landscape. This is the point where most stories would draw a hard line between victims and collaborators. Solstheim refuses to make that distinction simple. Some of the people trapped in Miraak's web were in the wrong place when a stone woke up. Others came because the promise of a powerful patron and a clear purpose was easier to bear than one more year of scraping a living out of ash-covered rock. The black books flatten these differences. In Apocrypha's accounting, they are all part of the same downstream effect of a choice made by one priest in another age. The mid-reveal is this: the black books are not personal diaries of temptation. They are infrastructure. Each volume is a subtly different piece of machinery. One teaches optimization, nudging its reader towards squeezing more use out of every skill and every kill. Another is obsessed with influence, offering gifts that make followers more obedient, allies more pliable, enemies more easily turned. A third concerns itself with information flow, rewarding those who learn how to find secrets inside other texts. The point is not any one gift. The point is that every decision you make inside these books pushes you into a particular role in Mora's larger design. On a map, this looks like a series of pressure points. Put a marker on Skaal village, where a community has spent centuries resisting the call of forbidden knowledge, only to lose their shaman in a single, catastrophic reading. Put another on Tel Mithrin, where a wizard who prides himself on independence is nonetheless feeding data to a Daedric prince with every experiment. Mark the corrupted standing stones ringing the island, each one a node where Apocrypha leaks into the waking world and turns free labor into scripted performance. Connect those markers, and a pattern emerges. Mora is not trying to conquer Solstheim the way a warlord would. He is not marching armies ashore or raising banners above Raven Rock. He is adjusting variables. How many people dream of pages? How much of the island's workday is spent under the influence of a distant library? How often do its greatest heroes find themselves thinking, in the quiet between battles, that one more visit to a black book might make the next fight easier? For the Dragonborn, the realization that the books are part of this kind of infrastructure is harder to face than any single nightmare in Apocrypha. It means that what felt like a private ordeal, a personal trip through a hostile library to earn a specific prize, was never really private at all. The corridors of stacked tomes and watchful eyes were not built for you. You were inserted into an ongoing process. When you choose between 3 powers on a black book's final page, you are not just customizing your build, you are revealing your priorities to the one being who can watch you make that choice from both ends of time. Do you favor survivability over risk, control over chaos, raw damage over subtle influence? The resulting perk or shout matters in battle, but the preference it reveals matters in Apocrypha. Miraak's downfall is the clearest illustration of how this design resolves. He believes, to the very end, that he is unique, that his reading of the Black Books has made him singular among mortals. He imagines himself as a disruptive element in the system, the one who got away from the dragons and will eventually find a way to slip Mora's grasp too. But when he dies, his knowledge does not die with him. It flows back into the realm that gave it, slotting neatly into the shelves, labelled and categorized. One more case of a mortal who thought betrayal could be a one-way path. Across Solstheim, smaller stories echo this pattern. A cultist whose journal insists he was on the verge of understanding everything before his handwriting trails off into spirals. A mage who records experiments with a black book's powers, only for the last pages to be covered in cramped apologies to students whose names he can no longer recall. They all thought they were using the books. In the end, the books used them. From high above, in the view no mortal gets to see, the black books on Solstheim resemble the early stages of a network spread. A test deployment, not yet scaled up to the rest of Tamriel. The island's isolation, its overlapping cultures, its exposure to both dragon power and Dunmer exile politics. All of this makes it a controlled environment. The island is paying in minds and memories now, in corrupted stones and vanished scholars. The results, the refined understanding of how mortals will trade pieces of themselves for knowledge, are what Mora will carry forward when he looks beyond Solstheim. If this were any other Daedric prince, the next step would be obvious. There would be an army or a shrine demanding blood, or a champion striding across the ash in armor that glows with stolen souls. Hermaeus Mora does not move that way. His victories are quieter, and they do not look like victories at all unless you know what he is measuring. Compared to his peers, his bargains seem almost honest. Boethia dresses cruelty up as a test of worthiness, demanding that followers prove themselves by treachery and murder. Clavicus Vile offers deals with a smile, and then twists the letter of every agreement until the original wish is unrecognizable. Molag Bal barely pretends at consent. He simply breaks people and calls the fragments his property. Mora, by contrast, offers exactly what he promises: knowledge. The trick lies in what he does not highlight. He does not remind you that you were already standing on the edge when you came to him, that the question burning in your mind had begun to hollow you out long before you saw the first black book. He does not explain that every answer he gives you will spawn 2 more questions, each sharper and more desperate than the last. On Solstheim, this honesty takes on a particular flavor. When a Skaal shaman warns against the black books, he is not repeating a vague religious taboo. He is speaking from within a tradition that has watched, for centuries, what happens to people who let curiosity outrun wisdom. The Skaal do not claim that knowledge itself is evil. They claim that certain kinds of knowledge, taken from certain hands, never leave you as you were. Set that beside the Telvanni attitude, and the contrast becomes a kind of moral experiment all its own. Neloth sees the same phenomena: the madness, the disappearances, the subtle warping of priorities, and interprets them as acceptable casualties in the pursuit of understanding. For him, the black books are not sacred or forbidden, just extremely potent tools. The Skaal ask what a thing will cost the soul. Neloth asks only whether it does what it claims. In that gap between questions, Hermaeus Mora finds his leverage. The more divided Solstheim is about the books, the less likely it is that any one group will be able to mount a unified response. The Skaal cannot simply burn every volume. They lack the reach, and their doctrine forbids certain forms of aggressive intervention. The Telvanni cannot monopolize them. The island is too wild, too riddled with old Nordic spaces that do not care who currently claims jurisdiction. So the books remain where they are most useful, scattered, whispered about, half feared and half desired. Some are buried in barrows, waiting for another generation's would-be hero. Some sit openly on pedestals, daring anyone with the right mix of arrogance and desperation to touch them. All of them are, in their way, open invitations to step outside the normal flow of time and consequence. For the Dragonborn, who is used to solving problems with steel, shout, and straightforward courage, this is a different kind of battlefield. There is no clean line of enemies to cut through, no clear hierarchy of bosses to topple. There is only a series of moments in which choosing to open a black book feels like the fastest way to protect someone else, or to finally get ahead of a threat that has been one step in front of them for far too long. From the outside, other Nords might call it hubris. From the inside, it feels like responsibility. This is where the ledger becomes personal. Every time the Dragonborn steps into Apocrypha, they leave a little more of their old life at the door. Not in dramatic cinematic ways, not in lost limbs or visible scars, but in quiet shifts of attitude. A problem that might once have inspired a long ride to seek counsel from a Jarl or a greybeard now suggests instead another visit to the shelves under Mora's gaze. Why argue with stubborn thanes or frightened villagers when answers are hanging just out of reach in a realm that has never once told you no without also saying, not yet? The strength that comes from the Black Books is real. It saves lives. Powers learned in Apocrypha knock cultists from their feet, tear lurkers apart, break Miraak's hold over the standing stones. There are people alive on Solstheim who would be dead if not for what the Dragonborn brought back from those half-lit corridors. To deny that would be dishonest. The ledger is not one column of red ink. There is black ink too. Rescued villages, defeated tyrants, a Daedric champion killed with the help of another Daedric patron's secrets. But even balanced books can hide interesting patterns. Look closely at the entries and another picture emerges. The Skaal elder who gave his life to wrest crucial knowledge out of a book so that his people could survive. The miners who lost months of their lives to enthrallment at corrupted stones. The mages whose minds gradually bent toward one more experiment, one more risky reading, because the alternative, admitting that they had already paid enough, felt too much like failure. Again and again, Solstheim pays in the same currencies: time, memory, autonomy, and the slow erosion of the belief that there should be limits. In exchange, it receives reprieves, victories, and the empowerment of a chosen champion whose relationship with knowledge is increasingly transactional. Hermaeus Mora does not need the island to fall. He only needs it to keep breaking, even in a way that teaches him everything he wants to know. Standing at the center of this, the Dragonborn faces a question that no shouting match with a dragon can answer. When does a tool become a master? At what point does reliance on the Black Books stop being strategy and start being obedience? The Skaal would say that the line is crossed the first time you open one. Neloth would argue that there is no line at all, only risk properly managed. Most people on Solstheim are too busy surviving to give the matter more than a passing thought, unless and until a black book touches their lives directly. Hermaeus Mora has the luxury of a longer view. From his vantage, the Dragonborn is one more, very significant data point. A mortal with an unusual soul, exposed to a carefully curated series of temptations, in a closed environment where the consequences of each choice can be observed through cults, stones, and shifting alliances. Whether this Dragonborn ends up serving Mora willingly, resisting him to the end, or taking some third path the prince did not quite predict, the result will still be useful. That is the final cruel efficiency of the Black Books. They are built to make sure that even defiance pays dividends. A reader who recoils from what they see in Apocrypha, who slams the covers shut and swears never to return, has still provided an answer to the only question that matters in that realm. What will you do when I show you this? The price can be refusal as easily as acceptance. Solstheim has, collectively, already paid enough to answer that question many times over. There is a version of this story where it ends in simple triumph. The Dragonborn breaks Miraak, frees the stones, returns to the Skaal with proof that Hermaeus Mora can be defied. The black books get shelved or buried. Life on Solstheim goes back to whatever passes for normal, on a frontier where ash and snow never really stop fighting for the sky. But even in that neatest possible ending, something has shifted. The island remembers, not in the tidy way of written histories, but in the uneven way of rumors, half-true tales, and the quiet instincts people develop without knowing exactly when or why. Children in Skaal village startle more violently from nightmares about drowning in paper. Miners in Raven Rock flinch when a page blows loose from a ledger and sticks to their boot. Telvanni apprentices hesitate just for a heartbeat before touching a book that hums a little when no one is speaking. These are small behaviors, but they add up to a kind of cultural scar tissue. Solstheim has learned, on a level beneath words, that there are questions not worth asking in a certain direction. Some of its people will push against that lesson, insisting that fear of knowledge is worse than any possible consequence. Others will build their whole sense of virtue around rejecting the temptation embodied in those cracked leather covers. The Skaal, having lost Storm, double down on their teachings. His death becomes a story they tell around hearths, not as a warning about Daedric perfidy, that is old news, but as a lesson in the limits of even the wisest among them. If a shaman as strong as Storm can be broken by a single reading, then no one is beyond the reach of a bad bargain. That realization sharpens their humility. It also sharpens their suspicion. Outsiders who speak too fondly of strange tomes find themselves watched more closely. For Neloth, the aftermath looks nothing like contrition. He catalogues Storm's demise alongside Miraak's fall and the Dragonborn's victories, treating each event as another data point in an ever-expanding theory of how minds respond to Apocrypha. If anything, he is more fascinated than ever. Here, at last, is evidence that a mortal can leverage the black books against a Daedric prince's chosen champion. Here, too, is proof that the cost can be fatal even when the outcome is technically successful. He files these conclusions away with the clinical satisfaction of a man who expects others to die for his understanding. Yet even Neloth is not entirely unchanged. The next time he sends someone into a black book, the lecture he gives beforehand is a fraction longer. He lingers half a heartbeat on the phrase, "You may not come back the same." He watches, with just a hint more intensity, to see whether they flinch. Raven Rock exists somewhere between these two poles. Its people have lived under too many flags to develop the kind of doctrinal certainty the Skaal enjoy. They have relied on too many powerful patrons to indulge the Telvanni fantasy of independence. For them, the Black Books become part of a larger, grim understanding that the forces which shape their lives are always playing games whose rules are only partly visible. If a book appears near the town in the years after Miraak, the response is practical. Someone suggests selling it to a wizard. Someone else suggests sealing it in stone. A third person whispers that perhaps the Dragonborn will come back for it, and if not, perhaps it is better left where no one can easily find it. No one, not even those who dismiss tales of Apocrypha as superstitious exaggeration, regards a black book as neutral. In all of this, the Dragonborn carries a different kind of record. There are other sources of power in Skyrim, blessings from the divines, boons from other Daedric princes, the raw authority of the Thuum itself. Some of those are gifts, some are trades, some are trials passed in blood. None of them leave quite the same aftertaste as a black book. The difference is not just in the physical sensations. Though the taste of ink at the back of the throat and the weight of invisible pages pressing at the edge of sight are hard to forget, it is in the awareness that somewhere in a realm where time loops back on itself, there is now a precise record of how you respond to temptation. That knowledge lives in the Dragonborn's mind like a splinter. When a new problem arises, a brewing conflict between holds, a rumor of another relic surfacing, a fresh Daedric entanglement, there is always, somewhere behind the more honorable instincts, the thought that Apocrypha might hold an answer. The Black Books have, by their very nature, made themselves the default what if in any calculation that involves knowledge. Choosing not to open them again becomes, paradoxically, a more active decision than choosing to do so. The first time, there was ignorance. You could not fully understand what you were risking. The second time, you walk in with your eyes open, knowing exactly how Mora's gaze feels on the back of your thoughts. The refusal to accept that gaze again is not passivity. It is effort, repeated every time the itch for certainty grows too strong. From Hermaeus Mora's side of the ledger, this effort is just as valuable as another round of compliance. A mortal who keeps going back proves one kind of hypothesis about how far beings will go for knowledge. A mortal who draws a line and holds it proves another, that there are thresholds even a Dragonborn will not cross, and that those thresholds can be mapped by watching which fears finally outweigh curiosity. Solstheim's present, then, is not a simple story about corruption or redemption. It is a place where people live with the lasting consequences of having brushed up against a realm that turns questions into structure. The Skaal tell tales that double as cognitive armor. The Telvanni refine their already razor-thin distinction between bravery and disposability. Ravenrock adds, "Don't touch the strange book," to a long list of practical survival rules that begins with, "Don't stand under an active ashfall if you can help it." And beneath all of that, in caves not yet cleared and ruins not yet disturbed, there are still black books resting on pedestals, their pages as fresh as if they were written today. They do not hum constantly. They do not shout for attention. They wait. When a Draugr stirs or a careless explorer kicks aside a loose stone, dust motes dance around them in the thin light that seeps in through cracks overhead. If someone draws closer, the ink tightens into more legible shapes, as if remembering how to be words in a language the new arrival will understand. Some of those books will never be found. Some will claim one reader and then lie dormant for centuries, content to let that single data point settle into the shelves of Apocrypha. Others will become recurring characters in Solstheim's drama, passed from wizard to thief to cultist to hero, until their bindings are worn and their margins are layered with notes in half a dozen hands. To Hermaeus Mora, these differences are cosmetic. The important thing is that they remain in circulation. The price of the Black Books is not just what they have already taken from Solstheim, it is what they have locked the island into being, a test case, a proof of concept, a story that cannot fully end as long as even one volume remains unopened. Every generation that hears about them faces the same choice in a slightly different world, and every answer, whether bold, fearful, or indifferent, is recorded in the same endless stacks. In the years after Miraak's fall, travelers crossing the Sea of Ghosts sometimes report a strange sight when they are close enough to see both Skyrim's peaks and Solstheim's dark line on the horizon. For a heartbeat, in the rippling distortion of cold air and reflected sky, the island looks less like land and more like a page. Black ink spread on white paper, edges curling ever so slightly, as if someone might reach down from the clouds and turn it. Most dismiss it as a trick of the light. A few, remembering how it feels to stand with a black book open in their hands while the world dissolves into whispers, know better. They tighten their cloaks, look away from that half-familiar outline, and hope that whatever Hermaeus Mora is writing there, he has gathered enough. For some, that hope turns into a kind of prayer, not to the divines, not to the Allmaker, but to the idea that there must be a limit, some line, somewhere, beyond which even a prince of fate cannot pry. It is a strange comfort, hoping for boundaries in a universe built on loopholes and exceptions. Yet on Solstheim, after everything the Black Books have done and undone, it is the only kind of hope that makes sense. When you step back from the ash and snow, from the ruined temples and whispering stones, The true price of the black books comes into focus in 3 layers. On the smallest layer, they take pieces of people. A memory here, a night's sleep there, the fine edge of someone's ability to tell dream from waking. They turn focused scholars into mutterers, devout shamans into empty shells, ambitious priests into puppets whose strings stretch into a sea of ink. These losses are intimate and devastating for the families and communities that feel them, but from a distance they blur into background tragedy. One more set of names on a long list of those claimed by harsh weather and harsher politics. On the middle layer, they bend an island. Solstheim's culture shifts under the book's influence. The Skaal refine their suspicion into doctrine. Telvanni arrogance finds new footholds. Raven Rock adds another invisible hazard to the map of its daily life. Stories about strange volumes and stranger dreams become part of the way people explain misfortune. He found something he shouldn't have. She read what was not meant for her. They went into the barrow and came back off. The island's very vocabulary for risk now includes the possibility of pages that open onto someplace else. On the largest layer, they give Hermaeus Mora exactly what his title promises: knowledge, not just of facts, how shouts work, how dragons think, how ancient magics can be repurposed, but of patterns. How a proud priest reacts when given an exit from an oppressive hierarchy. How a cautious shaman behaves when forced to choose between spiritual purity and his people's survival. How a chosen hero weighs the needs of the many against the toll taken on their own mind. None of this looks, at first glance, like conquest. There are no Daedric citadels rising from the sea of ghosts, no legions of tentacled horrors marching across Skyrim. The ships still sail. The mines still operate. The stones stand quiet more often than not. Measured on a map of borders and banners, Mora has gained nothing visible, but his realm is not measured on those maps. In Apocrypha, the victory is written in how thick the shelves grow along one particular aisle. A section marked Solstheim fills with case files. The Miraak incident, the Skaal refusal, the Telvanni experiments, the Dragonborn's repeated crossings. Each new entry refines a model, makes the next set of bargains easier to calibrate. Once you understand what an island like Solstheim will tolerate, you can begin to extrapolate. What about an entire province? What about a continent? This is where the Black Books stop being just an Elder Scrolls curiosity and become a lens on the setting itself. Tamriel is full of deals. Nords carve bargains with glory and song. Dunmer define themselves by the pacts their ancestors made with gods who walked among them. Bretons live and die by contracts both feudal and mercantile. Even the divines, distant as they seem, have made their own quiet arrangements about who gets to carry their mantles. Against that backdrop, the Black Books are a brutally honest mirror. They strip away the justifications and pageantry and reveal what is always at stake. Not just what you gain, but what kind of person you must become to hold it. A warrior who takes Boethiah's trial agrees, on some level, that betrayal can be a virtue. A worshipper who accepts Clavicus Vile's bargains concedes that their desires are negotiable commodities. A reader who continues to visit Apocrypha accepts that the integrity of their own mind is on the table. For the Dragonborn, this realization arrives slowly, in the quiet spaces between battles. Standing alone on a Solstheim cliff, feeling the wind tear at their cloak and the distant thrum of a standing stone that has finally fallen silent. They know they could go back. There are still unread passages, still untested combinations of power and insight. Somewhere in that endless library, there might even be a way to escape the burden of being Dragonborn altogether, or to reshape the rules that bind dragon souls and mortal fates. They also know, now, what the cost would look like. It would not be a dramatic collapse like Storn's. It would not be a gaudy fall like Miraak's, broadcast across the sky in beams of stolen power. It would be a gradual hollowing, more time spent in corridors of watching books, less in halls filled with living voices, more problems solved by consulting shelves, fewer approached with the messy, fallible counsel of jarls, priests, and friends. A life that becomes, step by step, more legible to Hermaeus Mora than it is to anyone in Skyrim. So they stand there, on that cliff, or beside a quiet stone, or beneath the fungal shadow of Tel Mithrin, and they make a decision that will never be recorded in any in-game journal. Maybe they choose to open one more black book, just once, to deal with a threat too large to face unaided. Maybe they decide that whatever happens next, it will not happen on pages. Either way, the ledger updates. From the perspective of a law scholar, it is tempting to chase this logic outward. If black books can turn Solstheim into a test page, what about other artifacts in other provinces? What about the subtle towers, those mythic engines scattered across Tamriel, each shaping reality in ways most mortals never notice? What about the relics of other princes, Azura's star, Meridia's beacon, Molag Bal's vampire chains? How many of these objects are, in their own ways, measuring us? These are the kinds of questions a channel like Tamriel Tales exists to ask. Not just, what does this do in gameplay, but what story is this object telling about how the world works? The black books answer that question with unnerving clarity. They are not just tools or temptations. They are instruments of observation. They do not merely change the people who read them. They render those people legible to something watching from outside the frame. Back in Apocrypha, a book closes itself with a damp final sound. The realm reshelves it, inches of dripping spine sliding back into place. On its cover, there is no visible tally of the lives it has touched. Mora does not need such markings. The data is already absorbed, the island it came from, the minds it has sampled, the futures it has nudged off one path and onto another. These are written in the patterns of the realm itself. On Solstheim, snow falls over a buried ruin where another black book waits. The stones above it shift, infinitesimally, with the seasons. Years may pass before anyone steps on exactly the wrong flagstone and triggers the mechanism that reveals the hidden chamber. When they do, when torchlight spills over that familiar leather and ink, another page in Hermaeus Mora's experiment will begin. The question will be the same as it has always been. What will you give up, this time, to know more than you did yesterday? And somewhere, in another episode and another deep dive, we will follow that question further, into the full story of Miraak's first bargains, or into the broader web of Daedric artifacts that turn Tamriel's heroes into walking contracts. For now, on this island of ash and snow, the black books sit silently on their pedestals, their price already woven into the lives of everyone who walks above them, whether they have ever touched a single page or not.